The transport shuttle touched down in the early hours of the morning before the station lights had shifted from their dim nighttime cycle to full operational brightness. 83 cadets disembarked onto the primary landing deck of the Vaelun Military Academy, one of the oldest and most prestigious institutions in the known galaxy. The deck was enormous, carved from reinforced obsidian gray alloy lit by columns of cold blue light that stretched 40 meters toward the vaulted ceiling. The air carried the faint chemical bite of recycled atmosphere and something older, the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of military tradition. Cadets shuffled forward in loose clusters, gravitating instinctively toward their own kind. The Dreth, heavy-bodied, four-armed with thick cranial ridges, moved in tight formation near the left flank. The Silurians drifted in silence, their bioluminescent markings flickering with low anxiety. The Kavari stood apart from everyone, tall and angular, their secondary eyes scanning the deck with open disdain for the chaos around them. No one paid attention to the human. She stepped off the ramp last, a single bag slung over one shoulder, and stopped at the edge of the deck. She was unremarkable by any measurable standard. Medium height, lean build, dark hair pulled back with the kind of practical efficiency that suggested habit rather than regulation. Her uniform was standard issue, unmodified, with no unit insignia and no academy pins. She wore no expression that could be easily read. Her name was Voss. She stood still for exactly 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, she did not check her datapad. She did not look for a guide board. She did not follow the crowd or orient herself using the overhead navigation markers that most incoming cadets immediately reached for. She simply looked. Her eyes moved in slow, deliberate arcs, left to right, near to far, low to high. She tracked the movement patterns of the administrative staff crossing the far end of the deck. She noted which corridors saw the most foot traffic, which checkpoints had the longest queues, and which had none at all. She observed the way the Kavari cadets were already being directed toward a separate registration lane, priority processing, almost certainly tied to diplomatic enrollment agreements. She noted the single overworked clerk managing the general intake desk, the stack of uncollected assignment packets behind her, and the fact that the officer standing beside the main doors had checked his wrist unit 4 times in the last minute. Running behind schedule, she thought. Probably an orientation delay, which means the first briefing hasn't started yet. She picked up her bag and walked to the intake desk. The clerk, a Silurian female with pale gray markings and exhausted eyes, looked up with the expression of someone who had already answered the same questions 40 times that morning. "Name and origin designation," she said flatly. "Mara Voss, Earth, Sol System, Arm 7. The clerk's markings flickered once, a barely perceptible reaction, before she looked back at her screen. "Human?" "Yes." A pause. The clerk typed something, waited, typed again. "You're in Intake Group 7. Orientation briefing is delayed. You'll receive your room assignment, academy access code, and training schedule at the secondary processing station." She gestured vaguely toward a corridor to the left. "Through there, 3rd door." "Thank you," Mara said. She did not go through the corridor to the left. She had already noticed, from her 11 seconds of observation, that the secondary processing station the clerk was referring to currently had a queue of approximately 30 cadets and 1 functioning terminal. The second terminal had a service panel open at its base and a technician crouched beside it with the specific posture of someone who had no idea what they were doing. That queue would take 40 minutes. Minimum. Mara walked to the right instead, toward a smaller, unmarked corridor she had noted during her scan of the deck. It was not on any of the guide boards. The foot traffic moving through it was exclusively staff, maintenance workers mostly, and one junior logistics officer moving quickly with a stack of physical documents under one arm. She followed at a distance, not close enough to attract attention, not far enough to lose the route. The corridor branched twice. She took the second branch, following the logic of the layout rather than any posted signage. The academy had been built in phases. She could tell from the variation in ceiling height and the subtle change in flooring material, and the original administrative core would be toward the center of the oldest section, where the structural density was highest. She was right. The room she found was small, a secondary intake office staffed by a single administrator who was currently eating a meal at his desk and reading something on a personal device. He looked up when she entered, startled. "This isn't," he began. "Secondary administrative intake," Mara said. "I know. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Cadet Voss, intake group 7. I was told processing would be through the main station, but the queue is backed up, and I didn't want to miss the orientation briefing if the delay gets resolved early." The administrator stared at her for a moment. He was Dreth, older, with the dulled cranial ridges of someone decades past their field service years. He had the eyes of a man who had been doing the same administrative job for a very long time and had developed an instinct for two types of cadets: the ones who caused problems and the ones who didn't. He set down his meal. "Assignment packet," he said. "I don't have one yet." "Name?" "Voss, Mara, human." He typed. He waited. He typed again. Then he reached behind him, pulled a sealed packet from a secondary rack that was, notably, completely full while the main desk rack had been nearly empty, and held it out. "Room assignment, access codes, schedule. Orientation briefing is at 6 in the morning if the delay clears, 7 if it doesn't. Mess hall opens at 5:30. It'll be crowded. If you want a seat, go early." "Thank you," Mara said. She took the packet. "The technician working on the terminal at the main processing station. Is there a maintenance request already filed, or should I flag it?" The administrator looked at her, a different look this time. "It's been filed," he said slowly, "since 3 in the morning." "Okay," she nodded. "Thank you again." She left. The mess hall opened at 5:30. Mara was there at 4:30, not because she was hungry, though she ate methodically and without hurry, working through a standard nutrient tray with the focused indifference of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. She was there because an empty mess hall was information. The layout of the serving stations, the location of the secondary exits, the way the ventilation system created a slight pressure difference near the eastern wall that would make conversation harder to overhear. The fact that the lighting was brighter near the officer's observation platform on the upper level, designed, she suspected, to make cadets feel watched even when no one was there. She filed all of it away and finished her meal before the first other cadets arrived. By the time the hall was half full, she had moved to a corner table with sight lines to both main entrances and was reviewing her assignment packet with the careful attention of someone reading a technical manual rather than an orientation document, which, Functionally, it was. The Academy's structure was layered in ways that weren't immediately obvious from the official documentation. There was the stated hierarchy: intake cadets, senior cadets, instructors, command staff, and then there was the real one, which she could already see taking shape in the way groups moved through the mess hall. The Kavari sat nearest the officer's platform without being told to. The Dreth clustered near the serving stations, positioning themselves between resources and everyone else out of what appeared to be pure instinct. The Silurians distributed themselves in a pattern that looked random but wasn't, each one maintaining exactly the same distance from the nearest non-Silurian, a social spacing protocol so consistent it had to be cultural. And the humans, there were 4 others, she had counted them during intake, sat separately from each other without seeming to notice they were doing it. Interesting, she thought. She did not sit with them. At 6:45 in the morning, the orientation briefing was confirmed for 7. The announcement came through the mess hall speaker system in 6 languages simultaneously, which created a wall of overlapping sound for approximately 3 seconds before the system staggered the translations. Mara had already packed her things by the time the announcement finished. The briefing hall was on the 3rd level of the administrative wing. She knew this not because it was in her assignment packet. It wasn't. The packet listed only a room designation without context, but because she had spent the last 40 minutes cross-referencing the room designation against the structural logic of the building layout and the foot traffic pattern she had observed since arrival. The administrative wing was north. The 3rd level would be accessible via the main corridor lifts, which would be crowded, or via the maintenance stairwell she had noted behind the secondary intake office. She took the stairs. She arrived 7 minutes before anyone else. The briefing hall was large enough to seat 200 cadets, tiered in a shallow amphitheater configuration with a central floor where the instructors would stand. The seats were unassigned. Most cadets, she knew from experience with institutional environments, would cluster toward the middle, close enough to appear engaged, far enough back to avoid being called on. She sat in the 3rd row, left of center, with a direct sight line to the instructor's position and the main display screen, close enough to observe detail, far enough that she wasn't performatively close. She waited. Cadets filed in over the next several minutes in the loose, disorganized way of people who had received a schedule change and weren't sure what the new expectations were. There was noise, the particular kind of noise that came from groups who didn't yet know each other performing the early rituals of social calibration, volume testing, posture signaling, the careful choreography of who sat next to whom and what that meant. A Dreth cadet, young, with the bright cranial ridges of someone who hadn't seen real field conditions yet, dropped into the seat beside her with the particular heaviness of a species that weighed nearly 300 kilograms. The seat's structural supports registered the load with a faint mechanical complaint. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Human?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," she said. He appeared to consider this. "You're in the 3rd row." "I am. Most humans sit further back." "I know," she said, and looked back at the display screen. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Rathak, 2nd-generation Dreth military family. My father commanded a border garrison for 11 years. He was waiting, she understood, for the equivalent disclosure. Species, family background, military lineage. the standard opening exchange of institutional hierarchies everywhere. "Mara Voss," she said. "Earth." Another pause. "That's it?" "That's it." Rathak made a sound that didn't translate directly, but carried the general shape of someone deciding to reserve judgment. He turned forward and said nothing else. At exactly 7 in the morning, the instructors entered. There were 3 of them. The one who walked to the center of the floor first was Kavhari, tall even by Kavhari standards, with the kind of deliberate stillness that came from decades of command. His uniform carried more service markers than Mara could count at this distance, which told her either that he was genuinely decorated or that he wanted cadets to think so. Probably both. He did not introduce himself immediately. He stood at the center of the floor and looked at the assembled cadets with the unhurried patience of someone who had done this many times and found it, if not interesting, at least consistently informative. The hall went quiet faster than she would have expected. "You were told," he said without preamble, "that this academy has a 112-year record of producing the finest military officers in 7 star systems. That is accurate." He paused. "You were also told, in your recruitment materials, that the first year eliminates 40% of all incoming cadets. That is also accurate." No one moved. "What you were not told," he continued, "is that the first week eliminates more than half of that 40%. Not through formal evaluation, not through testing, through self-selection." Another pause. "Cadets who do not belong here know it within the first week. The academy is designed to make that clear." Mara was watching his hands. They were clasped behind his back, completely still. His eyes moved across the room in a pattern, not random, not the performed sweep of someone trying to appear authoritative, but a genuine, systematic scan. He was reading the room the same way she had been reading it all morning. She found that interesting. "Today," he said, "you will receive your physical evaluations, your cognitive baseline assessments, your language and translation certifications, and your preliminary unit assignments. You will do this across 6 different stations in 6 different sections of this facility." He let that sit for a moment. "No maps will be provided." The room shifted, not panic, not yet, but the particular quality of attention that preceded it. "The stations are not hidden," he said. "The information required to locate them is available to anyone willing to look for it. Consider this your first evaluation." He looked across the room one more time. His eyes stopped briefly on Mara. She did not look away. He moved on. The stations were not hidden. That was technically true. It was also, Mara reflected, the kind of statement that was designed to sound reassuring while being functionally useless. Because knowing that something wasn't hidden and knowing where it was were 2 entirely different problems. She had spent the last 4 minutes of the briefing not listening to the administrative details about meal schedules and dormitory assignments, but instead working through the logical structure of the problem. 6 stations. 6 different sections of the facility. No maps. The instructor had said the information required to locate them was available to anyone willing to look for it. Available where, specifically, was the question. She left the briefing hall in the middle of the crowd, not at the front, where the aggressive ones went, and not at the back, where the uncertain ones drifted, in the middle, where movement was easiest and attention was lowest. She let the crowd carry her to the main corridor and then stepped sideways, out of the flow, and stopped beside a structural column. Around her, cadets were already fracturing into the predictable patterns. The Kavhari moved in a tight cluster toward the administrative wing, apparently operating on the assumption that official information would be posted in official locations. The Dreth were asking each other questions in low voices, pooling what little they knew. Several cadets had their data pads out and were attempting to access the Academy's internal network, which Mara already knew from her review of the assignment packet would not be available to incoming cadets until after their access codes were formally activated, a process that required completing the physical evaluation station first. A small, elegant catch. She appreciated the design of it. She looked at the column beside her. It was a structural pillar of the original Academy construction. She could tell from the material a dark composite alloy that predated the newer wing's building standards by at least several decades. And on its surface, at approximately eye level for a Kavhari, which meant slightly above eye level for her, was a directory panel. Not a digital one, a physical one, the kind that didn't require network access, engraved directly into a small plate of the same alloy as the column. It listed, in 6 languages, the permanent locations of every administrative and functional station in the Academy. Not the evaluation stations specifically. Those weren't permanent. But the sections were listed, and the instructor had said 6 stations in 6 different sections. She photographed the directory panel with her datapad and walked. The first station was physical evaluation, which logic suggested would be in the training wing, the largest dedicated section of the facility, located according to the directory in the southwestern quarter of the main complex. She found it in 11 minutes, which included 3 minutes navigating a corridor intersection that had been reconfigured since the directory panel was last updated. She could tell from the newer flooring material and the repositioned ventilation outlets. The evaluation itself was straightforward. A Silurian technician ran her through a standard battery, cardiovascular output, skeletal density, muscular response, atmospheric tolerance range. The technician did not comment on her results while recording them, which was standard protocol, but Mara noticed the slight pause before she entered the atmospheric tolerance numbers. Earth-standard humans registered tolerances that looked like errors on equipment calibrated for the galactic average. They weren't errors. "Next station," the technician said, handing her a completion chit. "Thank you," Mara said. She was back in the corridor before the next cadet had finished checking in at the entrance desk. The cognitive baseline assessment was in the research wing, which the directory listed as the northeastern quarter. She found it in 9 minutes. The assessment was administered by an automated system, a series of pattern recognition problems, logical sequencing tasks, and situational response scenarios presented without time limits, but with response time tracking that was obvious enough that only someone not paying attention would miss it. She paid attention to it. She worked at a pace that was neither her fastest nor artificially slowed, consistent, deliberate, the pace of someone who was thinking rather than performing. The scenarios were interesting. Several of them had no correct answer in any traditional sense, which she suspected was itself the point. She flagged 2 of them in her notes for later consideration. Completion chit. Next station. By the time she located the Language and Translation Certification Station, tucked into a secondary corridor of the communications wing that required navigating through what appeared to be an active maintenance area, but was almost certainly a deliberate routing choice. She had been moving for just under 2 hours. The certification process was the longest of the 3 she had completed. 40 minutes of spoken and written assessment across the 4 primary galactic trade languages, plus any species-specific languages the cadet had listed in their enrollment documentation. Mara had listed 3 beyond the standard 4. The examiner, a middle-aged Silurian with the patient eyes of someone who had administered this test thousands of times, looked up from his terminal when she finished the 3rd additional language assessment. "You listed these in your enrollment file," he said. "Yes. Most cadets list 1, sometimes 2. "I know." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she was becoming familiar with, the specific look of someone revising an assumption mid-conversation. Then he looked back at his terminal and entered her results. "You have 3 stations remaining," he said. "Unit Preliminary Assignment, Medical Baseline, and Tactical Orientation, in that order if you're following the recommended sequence." "Is the recommended sequence the most efficient one?" she asked. Another pause. "No," he said. "Medical Baseline and Tactical Orientation are in adjacent sections. Unit assignment is across the facility. The recommended sequence was designed for cadets who need the walk between stations to decompress." "Thank you," Mara said. She went to Medical Baseline first. The corridor outside the medical wing was where she first encountered the real shape of the day. 3 cadets were sitting on the floor against the wall, a Dreth, a Silurian, and one of the other humans, a tall young man she had seen briefly during the briefing. The Dreth had his head down. The Silurian's markings were cycling through a dull, repetitive pattern that indicated exhaustion or low-grade distress. The human looked up when she passed, and his expression carried the particular quality of someone who had been moving confidently an hour ago and had since revised their assessment of the situation. "You know where you're going?" he asked. "Medical Baseline," she said. "It's the next section over." He stared at her. "How long have you been—" "We've been trying to find the 3rd station for 40 minutes. "Directory panel," she said. "Main corridor, structural columns. Original construction, engraved alloy plate, eye level for a Kavhari." She paused. "There's one at every major corridor intersection. They don't require network access." The human stared at her. The Silurian's marking shifted, a flicker of something sharper moving through the exhaustion pattern. "The 3rd station," the Dreth said without lifting his head, "is where?" "Communications wing, secondary corridor, past the maintenance access point. It looks like a maintenance area, but it isn't. Follow the ventilation conduit routing on the ceiling. It'll take you there directly." She left them in the corridor and continued to Medical Baseline. Behind her, she heard the sound of 3 cadets getting back to their feet. The Medical Baseline evaluation took 12 minutes. 7 of those were automated scans. 3 were questions asked by a physician who never once looked directly at her face, only at the data scrolling across his display. The remaining 2 minutes were silence, the kind that followed unexpected readings. He cleared his throat once. "Human physiology continues to be statistically inconvenient," he said finally, entering the results. Mara nodded. She had heard variations of that sentence before. Completion chit. 5 stations finished, 1 remaining. Tactical orientation. The tactical orientation section was located in the oldest part of the academy, older even than the administrative wing. The corridors narrowed slightly there, the ceilings lower, the lighting warmer. The architecture shifted from efficient modern design to something almost ceremonial. Intentional, she thought. Spaces designed to slow movement, to make cadets aware they were entering somewhere important. She reached the entrance and paused, not because she was uncertain, because she was observing. Cadets emerged from the chamber in different states, frustrated, energized, confused, silent. One Kavhari exited, visibly irritated, secondary eyes unfocused, cognitive overload, likely. A pair of Silurians spoke rapidly to each other, replaying decisions aloud. A Dreth walked out slowly, shoulders lowered in what Mara recognized as recalibration after failure. Information. She entered. The room was circular, no desks, no instructors visible, only a projection field that activated the moment the door closed behind her. A battlefield appeared around her, full immersion simulation, urban terrain, multi-species, civilian population markers, limited resources, conflicting command directives layered across her display. A voice spoke from nowhere. Tactical orientation assessment. No optimal solution exists. Begin. The scenario unfolded immediately. Multiple crises, limited time, incomplete information. Most cadets, she suspected, would attempt to solve the situation. She didn't. She categorized it. Objectives, constraints, behavioral predictions, system intent. The academy wasn't measuring victory, it was measuring decision structure. So she built one. She prioritized civilian survivability over territorial control. Delegated hypothetical units according to species strengths rather than command hierarchy. Accepted controlled losses early to prevent cascading failures later. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She finished with 32 seconds remaining on the scenario clock. The simulation ended without comment. Silence filled the room. Then the door opened. No evaluation, no feedback. Of course not. The academy never confirmed results immediately. When Mara stepped back into the corridor, the station cycle was complete. All 6. She checked the time. 6 hours and 14 minutes since orientation briefing. Earlier than expected. Around her, cadets were still moving between sections. Some hurried, some clearly lost, some pretending not to be lost. Groups had begun forming temporary alliances based on shared confusion. Patterns had stabilized, and Mara realized something quietly significant. She no longer needed to think about where anything was. She simply knew. The academy had become a mental map. Corridor distances translated automatically into travel time. Traffic patterns predicted themselves. She knew which lifts stalled during peak movement, which stairwells stayed empty, which intersections amplified sound, and which absorbed it. She knew where instructors preferred to stand when observing without being noticed. She knew where cadets gathered when they wanted privacy. She knew which routes were fastest and which only looked fast. By late afternoon, she moved through the facility without slowing once to orient herself. A second-year cadet stopped her near the training wing. "Intake?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you know where tactical orientation is? I've been circling for 20 minutes. She pointed down a side corridor without breaking stride. "Second left. Follow the older lighting panels. Door without designation marking." He blinked. "Thanks." She continued walking. At 1900 hours, the academy shifted into evening cycle. Lighting softened. Corridor traffic decreased. The constant background noise lowered by nearly half. Mara returned to the mess hall, not to eat, to observe the end state of the day. Cadets compared experiences loudly now, reconstructing the evaluation through shared confusion. No maps is insane. I swear the stations move. They're testing memory. No, they're testing teamwork. None of them were entirely wrong. None of them were entirely right. She sat in the same corner seat as morning. Different environment now. Same vantage point. Across the hall, Rathak noticed her. He stared for several seconds before standing and walking over. "You finished," he said. "Yes." "All stations?" "Yes." He hesitated. "I have 3 remaining." She nodded once. He seemed about to ask something else, then stopped, as if realizing he didn't know the correct question. He returned to his table. Mara finished a cup of nutrient tea and left. By the end of the first day, she understood the academy better than many cadets who had lived there for months, not because she was faster, because she had never stopped observing. Night cycle began at 2200 hours. The academy dimmed gradually, lights lowering section by section like a controlled sunset. Mara walked the outer corridor ring before returning to her assigned quarters. Not exercise, verification. She confirmed distances she had estimated earlier, counted door intervals, noted which security drones altered patrol routes after peak hours. The academy felt different at night. Honest, without performance. On an observation balcony 2 levels above the main courtyard, 3 instructors stood in silence. The Kavari commander from orientation watched the corridor below. A display hovered beside him, cycling through intake data, completion times, movement paths, decision metrics. Most cadets showed erratic patterns, looping routes, repeated dead ends, long idle periods. One path looked different. Clean lines, minimal retracing, efficient adaptation after each environmental change. The commander enlarged the path. It spread across the academy like a carefully drawn blueprint. "Human?" said the Silurian instructor quietly. "Yes," the commander replied. They watched as Mara crossed the courtyard below, unaware of the observation. She did not look hurried. She did not look proud. She simply walked as if she belonged there. The Dreth instructor leaned forward slightly. "She shared information," he noted. "Several cadets reached stations after encountering her." The commander nodded once. "Without forming alliances," he said. Another pause. Interesting balance. No praise entered his voice, no concern either, only recognition. Elsewhere in the academy, a Silurian cadet followed a ventilation conduit exactly as instructed earlier and found the communication station. A human cadet corrected another group's route using directions he barely understood but trusted anyway. Rathak stood at a corridor intersection, looked around once, then chose the correct path, the one Mara had taken hours earlier. Small ripples, unannounced, uncredited. Mara entered her room. Standard cadet quarters, minimal furnishings, neutral lighting. She placed her bag beside the desk, sat, opened her assignment packet again, reviewed tomorrow's schedule, memorized it once, closed it. Outside, distant footsteps echoed through the corridor as cadets hurried to finish what she had completed hours before. She turned off the light. The room went dark. Across the academy, conversations continued, speculation, frustration, admiration, confusion. Her name was spoken only a few times, quietly, uncertainly, as if people were not yet sure why they remembered it. Mara lay still, eyes open in the darkness, listening to the building settle into night cycle. The academy was no longer unfamiliar, and somewhere, without announcement or ceremony, the academy had noticed her too. No words marked the moment, only observation and silence.